Okay, so today we're diving into something kind of fascinating. You've brought us this sermon. It's by Pastor W.F. Kumuyi, and it's called, get this, The Secret of Living in Holiness Without Struggling.
Without struggling.
Yeah, without struggling.
Okay.
I mean, who doesn't love a shortcut?
Yeah.
But really, can holiness be effortless?
Well, I mean, the idea of effortless anything is definitely appealing.
Right.
But you're right to kind of wonder about that. Pastor Kumuyi's message here is pretty different from how some people think about holiness, as this constant uphill battle against temptation.
Right. Like those New Year's resolutions we've all made and maybe even broken a time or two.
Yeah.
Like you start with these great intentions.
Exactly.
But then, well, life gets in the way.
Yeah, and Pastor Kumuyi argues that all that, like grinding our teeth and just relying on willpower to be good, might be missing the point. He says that true holiness, it isn't something that we achieve just by ourselves. Through sheer effort, it's something we receive.
Okay, so how does that work? Do we just wait around for holiness to fall into our laps?
Well, not exactly. Pastor Kumuyi points to Christ's sacrifice as the key. He's saying that by accepting this act of grace, we kind of open ourselves to a different way of being. It's not about us becoming worthy on our own, but about accepting this gift that allows us to become more aligned with, the divine.
So it's less about doing and more about being.
You could say that, but it's not about just being passive either.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing a power that's greater than ourselves and letting that power work through us. It's like, trying to bake a cake with only flour. You need other ingredients.
Right.
So what are the missing ingredients in the recipe for holiness, according to Pastor Kumuyi? That's what we'll be exploring.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It makes me think about those times when I'm trying to make a change, in my life.
Yeah.
But I feel stuck, like I'm missing a key ingredient. So is faith the missing ingredient here?
Faith is definitely a big part of it, according to Pastor Kumuyi. He argues that faith, it isn't just about believing in something. It's about trusting in something so much that it transforms us from the inside out. It's about, tapping into a wellspring of strength and guidance that we might not even know we have.
So how does Pastor Kumuyi support this idea with Scripture?
Well, he points us to a few really interesting passages, to kind of explain this. Like in Acts 15.9, he highlights this phrase, purifying their hearts by faith.
Purifying their hearts by faith. Okay, so it's not about following a set of rules perfectly, but about something changing internally.
That's how he interprets it. And he goes on to connect this to Ephesians 5.26, where it talks about Christ wanting to sanctify and cleanse the church. Sanctify
and cleanse. So we've got this cleansing and purifying happening through faith. What's that third passage he brings up?
The third one's from Titus 2.14, and it talks about Christ redeeming and purifying a peculiar people for himself.
Redeeming and purifying. There's definitely a recurring theme here of transformation, of being made new or clean through something outside ourselves.
Exactly. And for Pastor Kumuyi, that something is the sacrifice of Christ. He sees these verses as evidence that true holiness, it's not about our own efforts, but about surrendering to a power that's bigger than ourselves and allowing that power to work in us.
It makes me think of that idea of grace, that we're not necessarily worthy of this transformation, but it's freely given to us.
That's a great connection. And it really highlights how Pastor Kumuyi's message, it differs from some other perspectives. Like some denominations, they might emphasize more of a balance, of faith and good works, where what you do plays a bigger role in achieving holiness. Others might focus on specific rituals or practices as paths to spiritual purity.
So how does this idea of receiving holiness through faith, how does that play out in our everyday lives? If we really take this to heart, does it mean we just kind of sit back and let things happen? Or is there more to it?
That's a good question. It sounds pretty appealing to think holiness is just, given to us. But does it mean we don't actually have to do anything? Should we just ditch all the self-help books and meditation apps?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. See, Pastor Kumuyi, he isn't suggesting that we just become passive. Like couch potatoes of holiness.
Right.
It's not about inaction. It's more about, where does the power to act come from? Where does that power to change come from?
Okay, so it's not about passivity, but being empowered. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, think about it this way. Imagine, you're trying to climb a mountain on your own. It's a hard slog, right?
Yeah.
But what if you had the right gear and a map, maybe even like an experienced guide. That's kind of what Pastor Kumuyi is getting at. He's saying faith, accepting Christ's sacrifice. It's like getting all of that. It equips us, empowers us to make the climb. So the climb is still there. The challenges are still there.
Yeah.
But we just approach them with a different, source of strength.
Exactly. And that source of strength, that empowerment, allows us to keep growing. It's not about being perfectly holy right this second, but about continuing to move forward, one step at a time, with this new sense of purpose. And the tools to navigate all of those, those tricky moral dilemmas we all face.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's like in those personal growth books, right? Where they talk about tapping into your inner potential. I'm not saying you won't have to put in effort, but that by connecting with that inner strength, you're better equipped to handle the journey.
That's a great parallel. It shows how even outside of, a strictly religious context, a lot of us, we recognize this need for something greater than ourselves to help us, become better versions of ourselves.
So coming back to Pastor Kumuyi then, maybe the struggle that he's talking about, it isn't about the effort itself, but about trying to go it alone, just relying on willpower. Maybe it's in those moments where we feel, the most challenged, that this whole idea of receiving holiness through faith, it becomes the most relevant.
That's a really powerful insight. And I think it leaves us with something important to think about. Whether or not we, subscribe to Pastor Kumuyi's beliefs,
right?
We all have our own personal mountains to climb, our own ideas of what a fulfilling life looks like. I think the question is, what sustains us on that journey? What gives us that strength, that guidance to navigate those inevitable bumps in the road? Maybe, just maybe, there's something to be said for exploring those different sources of strength, both within ourselves and, beyond ourselves, as we try to become the best versions of ourselves.
You've given us a lot to think about today. Thanks for bringing us this sermon and walking us through these really complex ideas. It's definitely broadened my perspective.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure diving into this with you. Always happy to explore these kinds of questions.
Thank you for joining us today on Sermon Insights, where we delve deep into the messages that inspire and challenge us. If you found today's review enlightening and you're eager for more thoughtful breakdowns of powerful sermons, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss out on any of our future episodes. We're here to uncover the depths of these messages together, and your engagement helps us bring more insightful content directly to you. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey of faith and understanding together.